The oak-paneled boardroom of Brightspan Logistics was quiet, except for the rhythmic click of the vote counters. The $1.2 billion acquisition deal was minutes from sealing, 12 years of Jovi Raines' work funneling toward this moment. Then, without warning, Chairman Harlan cleared his throat. Effective immediately, Jovi Raines is relieved of her duties as Chief Executive Officer. The words hit like a dropped gavel. For half a second, she wondered if she'd misheard. The stack of deal documents in front of her blurred. Her mind didn't go first to her title or the power being stripped from her, but to her younger brother. His heart surgery was scheduled in 10 days. The company's insurance would cover most of it, unless she was no longer an employee. If this termination stood, the coverage would vanish in 24 hours. She kept her hands flat on the table, no flinch, no protest. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of watching her unravel. Harlan avoided her eyes as he gestured toward the door. "The board thanks you for your service." The door opened, and in walked Martin Hale. Crisp suit, perfect smile. The kind of man who measured his words by how well they'd photograph in the press. Jovi knew that face. She'd seen him at 2 separate dinners with executives from Norva Freight, Brightspan's fiercest competitor. Back then, she'd wondered why a mid-tier consultant was breaking bread with their top brass. Now she had her answer. Jovi had built Brightspan from a patchwork of regional carriers into the Midwest's most reliable supply network. She had fought for every contract, modernized every warehouse, and personally overseen the launch of the routing authentication matrix, a system no rival could match. Her leadership was numbers, grit, and results. Martin's was optics and backroom handshakes. The contrast was almost insulting. She gathered her folder and pen. Her chair scraped softly against the marble floor. Inside, the shock pressed like a weight against her ribs, but her voice stayed even as she said, "Enjoy the vote." As she stepped into the hallway, the door closed behind her. She didn't know how yet, but one thing was certain. They had just handed the future of Brightspan and her brother's health to a man loyal to someone else, and that was a mistake she intended to make them regret. The hallway outside the boardroom felt colder than it had when Jovi Raines walked in that morning. She moved past the glass walls and muted carpet, her heels clicking in a steady, unhurried rhythm. Behind her, the muffled voices of the board carried on without her, as if 12 years of work could be swept aside like a used coffee cup. Her mind pulled her backward in time, tracing the arc of her years at Brightspan. When she joined, the company had been a tangle of failing regional carriers, each hoarding its own outdated systems. Routes overlapped inefficiently, shipments vanished into paperwork black holes, and their reputation was one late delivery away from collapse. Jovi had changed all of that. She'd fought tooth and nail to unify operations, negotiating with stubborn local managers, replacing obsolete hardware, and overhauling software that looked like it belonged in a museum. She'd walked distribution floors at 2 a.m, clipboard in hand, learning every bottleneck herself instead of delegating the mess. Her proudest achievement was the routing authentication matrix, a control layer she had designed, coded, and integrated herself. It was invisible to outsiders, even to most executives, but it was the pulse of Brightspan's entire network. Every shipment, every truck route, every warehouse dispatch request passed through it for verification. Without the matrix, nothing moved, and only Jovi held the full authentication chain. The thought should have brought her comfort. Instead, it pressed against the ache already forming in her chest. Pride for what she'd built mixed bitterly with the knowledge of who would now sit in her chair. Martin Hale, slick, untested, and worse, compromised, would inherit the shell of a machine he didn't know how to run. As she reached the elevator, her phone buzzed. She pulled it from her jacket pocket and saw a subject line in bold red. Matrix Security Alert. Code renewal scheduled in 6 hours. Her eyes narrowed. The codes rotated automatically every week, but full authority to initiate the new chain rested with her. Without her confirmation, the system would lock, requiring multi-point verification that Martin couldn't possibly supply. 6 hours. That was all it would take for Brightspan's newly crowned leader to discover he'd been handed the keys to a car with no engine. The elevator door slid open, and she stepped inside, pressing the button for the lobby. 10 days until her brother's surgery, 6 hours until the Matrix shifted beyond their reach. 2 ticking clocks, each critical in its own way. She tightened her grip on the phone. Pride reminded her that she had built something no one else could replace. Bitterness reminded her why they didn't deserve to keep it. When the elevator reached the ground floor, Jovi walked out into the cold Chicago air, her expression calm, her pace steady. She had time, just enough to decide whether to save the system she'd built or let it remind them exactly what they'd lost. The revolving doors of Brightspan's headquarters whispered shut behind Jovi Rains as she stepped onto the sidewalk. The winter air bit at her cheeks, but her stride remained even, in her left hand. Her phone vibrated, a reminder that the routing authentication matrix was still tethered to her. She stopped at the corner, out of sight from the glass facade above, and unlocked the device. Her thumb hovered over the secure command panel, one biometric scan, a rotating passphrase, and a final confirmation code. When she pressed standby mode, a soft vibration confirmed the order. Across 4 states. The effect began within minutes. Trucks already on the road slowed as dispatch orders failed to verify. At way stations, drivers stared at blinking yellow screens. In warehouses, forklifts sat idle. Cargo pallets stranded mid-aisle. Automated loading arms paused mid-motion like statues. It was as if the entire network had inhaled and refused to exhale. Jovi slipped the phone back into her pocket and began walking again. The power wasn't in the act itself. It was in knowing precisely what it would do, and how long it would take for the first call to come. She didn't need to raise her voice, slam a door, or make a scene in that boardroom. The Matrix would do the talking for her. The countdown had already begun. 48 hours until the system locked permanently without her reauthorization. 48 hours before even she would need a complex re-entry process to regain control. For Martin Hale, that window would be useless. He lacked the authority, the knowledge, and the trust protocols embedded deep in the code. Her phone buzzed again. This time, not an automated alert. A message from Lena Torres, one of her most reliable regional managers. Lena. Saw Martin in the exec suite. He's forwarding route data to an outside address. Looks like Norva Freight's domain. What's going on? Jovi's lips curved into the faintest smile, though there was no warmth in it. She had suspected his ties to Norva Freight. Lena's message turned suspicion into fact. The board had handed her company's arteries to a man intent on bleeding them dry. She typed a short reply. Jovi. Let him. The routes won't work without me. No explanation, no outrage, just precision. The same precision she had used to build the network, to integrate the Matrix, to predict exactly how long it would take for panic to reach Harlan's desk. By the time she reached her car, the first missed call notification appeared on her screen. Operations. She ignored it, sliding into the driver's seat. She glanced once more at the skyline behind her. The building stood tall, but inside, its heartbeat was fading. She would decide, coldly, carefully, when and if it would start again. By noon, the ripples of Jovi Rains' silent command had swelled into visible waves. The headlines appeared first, quick and blunt across news tickers. Brightspan network stalls, regional supply disruptions reported. Hospital shipments delayed. State officials seek answers. Inside distribution centers. Supervisors scrambled to explain why orders that had been confirmed hours ago now showed as pending verification. Forklifts sat idle while fresh produce warmed in unrefrigerated trailers. Across the Midwest, assembly lines in automotive plants slowed. then stopped entirely. Grocery chains sent urgent emails warning of empty shelves within 24 hours. From her apartment's balcony, Jovi watched the city hum below her, unaware it was living on borrowed time. There was a strange calm in knowing she could trace every disruption back to a single tap on her phone. Quiet satisfaction stirred in her chest, not joy, not gloating, but the steady awareness that her creation still obeyed her, and her alone. The phone rang. The number on the screen wasn't work, it was her brother's cardiologist. "Ms. Rains," the doctor began. His tone clipped but apologetic. "We've had to move your brother's surgery up. His condition is deteriorating faster than expected. We're now classifying it as urgent." Jovi's hand tightened around the phone. "What does that mean for cost?" "It raises the overall expense by about 20%. Additional pre-op measures. More ICU time. Size." She thanked him, ended the call, and stood still for a long moment. The matrix was a lever she controlled with absolute precision. But this, the fragile clock ticking inside her brother's chest, was something she couldn't program or delay. Her phone buzzed again. This time, the caller ID made her lips press into a thin line. Martin Hale. She answered on the third ring. "What the hell is going on?" Martin's voice was sharp. The calm PR veneer stripped away. "Operations are frozen. I need the recovery code now." "You have the regional keys," Jovi said evenly. "Use them." "They're invalid. Nothing's working." "That's because the codes change every hour," she replied. "Without the full chain, you're chasing a moving target." A pause. Heavy, frustrated breathing. "You're holding the company hostage." "No," she said, her voice still measured. "I'm protecting the system from someone who doesn't understand it." Before he could respond, she ended the call, sliding the phone onto the table. Jovi let herself exhale slowly. The satisfaction of control was still there, but it now shared space with the tight coil of worry in her stomach. 48 hours to decide whether to unlock the network, and 10 days. Now fewer. To make sure her brother was on that operating table. The world outside didn't know it yet, but the cracks in Brightspan's empire had only just begun to show. By the following morning, the chaos had breached every wall Brightspan's leadership had tried to build around it. Cable news anchors debated the company's logistical meltdown, while financial networks tracked the stock's plunge in real time. Hashtags calling for accountability trended on social media. Inside the headquarters, shareholders bombarded the board with calls and emails. Some threatened lawsuits, others demanded resignations. Harland issued a carefully worded statement blaming unexpected technical challenges. But the words rang hollow even to the most loyal investors. The truth was slipping through the cracks faster than they could patch it. Jovi sat in her kitchen, coffee cooling beside her, when her phone lit up with a message from an encrypted contact she hadn't heard from in months. The name on the screen, R. McClellan, made her straighten in her chair. McClellan was a senior operations manager at Norva Freight, and one of the few people in that building she trusted to speak plainly. She opened the message. "You were right. Hale's been feeding us Brightspan route data since before the vote. Our execs thought it was clean intel. I told them it smelled wrong. You want the proof?" Jovi's jaw tightened. She tapped out a quick reply. "Send it." Within seconds, a secure file arrived, screenshots of Martin's emails to Norva Freight leadership, forwarding route spreadsheets, distribution hub schedules, and dispatch maps. The timestamps aligned with the hours following her dismissal. Her anger flared hot. But beneath it was something sharper. Contempt. This wasn't corporate gamesmanship, it was amateur treachery. Martin hadn't just betrayed Brightspan, he'd done it clumsily, without understanding what he was stealing. A second message arrived from McClellan. "One more thing, your matrix. I think that's what you called it? The data's useless without it. Whatever you built is stripping critical fields from every export. They're staring at empty columns and don't even know it." Jovi leaned back, exhaling slowly. So he'd been peddling scraps. He'd marched into her chair thinking he could open every door with stolen keys, never realizing those keys were cut to fit locks that no longer existed without her. Her phone buzzed again, another call from the Brightspan switchboard. She let it ring out. The contempt stayed with her as she scrolled through Martin's messages again. The language was smug, self-assured, written by a man convinced he was untouchable. She imagined the look on his face when he learned the files he'd passed along were as useful as blank paper. For now, she tucked the proof away. The right moment to use it would come, and when it did, she wouldn't need to raise her voice. She'd let the facts, and his own words, carve through whatever false image he'd built. Anger could burn fast and fade. But contempt? Contempt had patience, and Jovi intended to let hers work slowly, deliberately, until Martin Hale understood exactly how far beneath her he'd always been. By sunrise, the crisis had moved beyond Brightspan's walls and into the hands of state leaders, governors from Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio issued joint statements demanding an immediate restoration of supply lines. Hospitals were rationing critical equipment. Grocery chains were negotiating with alternative carriers at double the cost. The national morning shows ran rolling segments on the Midwest freight freeze, featuring empty store shelves and stalled factory floors. From her apartment, Jovi Raines watched the coverage with steady eyes. Every headline, every soundbite pushed the same unspoken truth closer to the surface. Brightspan's stability had been tied to her leadership, and without her, the system was unraveling in plain view. The personal stakes pressed close. 72 hours. That was the deadline before her family's health insurance policy, still tethered to her position at Brightspan, would be terminated completely. Without it, her brother's surgery costs would skyrocket beyond anything she could cover on her own. Yet even with the clock ticking, she refused to be rushed into a move that didn't serve her long game. She brewed coffee, the rich scent filling her kitchen, and kept the television volume low. The commentators were beginning to speculate about leadership failures, hinting that the board had acted rashly. Call-in segments featured industry experts describing her as indispensable and the architect of Brightspan's operational backbone. Public sentiment was shifting, and Jovi could feel it, like a tide turning in her favor. Her phone buzzed with a number she recognized from her years of navigating press storms. Alan Greer, a veteran investigative reporter known for digging until he hit bedrock. She answered. "Alan!" "Jovi," he said without preamble. "You know, I'm not in the habit of calling without a reason. I've got sources in Norvafreight willing to go on record about a mole in Brightspan's C-suite. They're pointing straight at Martin Hale." Jovi's fingers drummed lightly against the countertop. "That's not news to me." "I figured," Alan said. "Here's the thing. If you agree to an on-camera interview, I'll drop the name during the segment. We'll connect the dots for the public. But I want you there to give context. And, let's say, to make it clear who still holds the keys." She weighed it silently. An open interview would accelerate the board's panic. It would also force Martin to defend himself in real time, without the luxury of hiding behind internal memos. "I'll think about it," she replied, her voice calm, almost casual. "Don't take too long," Alan warned. "This story's got legs, but it'll run without you if it has to." When she hung up, Jovi's reflection in the darkened window looked exactly how she felt. Composed, precise, in control. The board might have stripped her title, but the narrative was no longer theirs to write. It was hers. The summons came mid-morning, less than a day after Alan Greer's call. A terse email from the Brightspan board's executive assistant. "Urgent meeting, 11 a.m. Attendance required." Jovi arrived at headquarters with 18 hours left before the routing authentication matrix would reset permanently. The winter wind needled her cheeks as she walked past the glass facade. but inside. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of panic barely concealed behind cologne and coffee. The boardroom looked different now. Harlan's voice lacked its earlier authority. His handshake too quick. Martin Hale stood near the window, shoulders tense, his perfect smile absent. "Jovi," Harlan began, gesturing toward a chair at the center of the table. "We'd like to propose a resolution." She sat without speaking, her expression neutral. Harlan folded his hands. "We're prepared to reinstate you on a temporary basis. You'll have full operational oversight of the supply network until the crisis stabilizes. Compensation will reflect your contributions, significantly above your previous package," Martin added quickly. "Of course, some strategic decisions will remain with the current leadership. The board believes a collaborative approach will—" Jovi let the pause stretch until both men shifted uncomfortably. The satisfaction was in the silence, in making them fill the space she controlled. "How long?" she asked finally. 60 days, subject to review," Harlan said. "It's the best path forward for everyone involved." She glanced at her phone on the table. The countdown app she'd set for the Matrix ticked in quiet red digits. 18 hours, 2 minutes, and 45 seconds. Each second was hers to use or waste. "You should know something before we discuss this further," she said, her tone even. "The routing authentication matrix doesn't belong to Brightspan." Harlan blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's proprietary technology," she continued, "registered 3 years ago under Rain's Infrastructure LLC. I designed it. I own it. You've been using it under an implied license because I allowed it." A ripple of unease moved around the table. Martin's jaw tightened. "That can't be right. Our counsel—" "Can confirm the filing with the Federal Patent Office," Jovi interrupted smoothly. "Which means, in 17 hours and change, the system will lock unless I reauthorize it, and only I can reauthorize it." She leaned back, hands folded in her lap, the faintest curve at the corner of her mouth. The room was silent except for the faint tick of the clock above the door. Harlan cleared his throat. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," she replied, eyes steady. "You called me here. I'm listening." The satisfaction stayed quiet inside her, steady and deep. For the first time since the board's ambush, every person in the room understood exactly who held the leverage, and she didn't need to raise her voice to prove it. Jovi Rains didn't rush to speak. The silence in the boardroom was still working for her, stretching like a taut wire. Harlan leaned forward, his pen tapping against the table. Martin Hale avoided her gaze, his posture stiff. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady, unhurried. "Here's my proposal. Brightspan formally transfers full ownership rights of the routing authentication matrix to Rain's Infrastructure LLC. In return, I will restore the system for 60 days, giving you time to appoint a new CEO." The words landed with weight. No threat, no raised tone, just a clear line drawn. "That's unreasonable," Harlan said, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's necessary," Jovi replied. "You've already seen what happens when the matrix isn't in the right hands. This is me offering you an exit." They knew she was right. Outside the boardroom, Brightspan's largest clients were calling hourly, demanding updates. State officials had begun drafting legal action for breach of essential service. The Department of Transportation had sent an inquiry. The pressure wasn't abstract anymore. It had names, signatures, and legal teeth. A knock on the door interrupted the tense air. Harlan's assistant stepped in, carrying a laptop. "You need to see this," she said. The assistant set the laptop on the table and played a video feed. Grainy but clear enough. Martin Hale in a private office, speaking to a Norva Freight executive over video call. On the desk in front of him were Brightspan route schedules and hub manifests. His voice was audible through the speakers. These are the latest dispatch runs. They won't be valid much longer, but it's the best I can get you before the lockout." The room chilled. Harlan's eyes cut to Martin. "Is this real?" Martin's face flushed. "This is out of context." "It's damning," Jovi said, her tone sharpened only by precision. "And now you understand why the Matrix will never function under his oversight." The assistant closed the laptop and left without a word. Harlan looked down at the table, the fight draining from his posture. "We'll need to review the legal framework," he muttered. "You have 16 hours before the reset," Jovi reminded him. "Every minute you stall is another shipment stranded, another contract you risk losing. My terms stand." The shift in the room was tangible. What had begun as a negotiation now felt like a formal acceptance of her authority. Jovi's confidence rose with each nod from the board members who had once voted her out. For months, they'd underestimated her. Now, they were realizing she'd been holding the map, the compass, and the only set of keys all along, and she was done pretending otherwise. The contract was signed just after midday. Harlan's pen scratched the final stroke across the page. The sound oddly small for a moment that shifted the company's balance of power. Jovi Raines read each clause twice before adding her signature. The routing authentication matrix now belonged, in full legal clarity, to Raines Infrastructure LLC. They didn't celebrate. The board members filed out quickly, some avoiding her eyes, others giving short nods as if conceding defeat without words. Martin Hale was gone before the ink dried. In a quiet conference room, Jovi opened her laptop, logged into the Matrix console, and entered the master credentials. A soft chime confirmed her access. She navigated to the control panel, slid the status bar from standby to active, and confirmed the override. Across 4 states, engines roared back to life. Trucks that had idled at rest stops received fresh route confirmations. Forklifts beeped as they resumed moving pallets. In rail yards, loading cranes swung into motion, placing containers on flat cars bound for cities that had been waiting for days. The frozen arteries of the Midwest supply chain began to pulse again. She leaned back in her chair, letting out a slow breath. Relief washed through her, less the thrill of victory, more the easing of a tension that had gripped her since the moment Harlan had spoken her dismissal. The network she'd built was moving again, proving once more that it could only function in her hands. But even in that relief, her mind remained alert. Control was not something you surrendered after winning it back. The board might have agreed to her terms, but corporate memory was short, and greed had a way of erasing lessons too quickly. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from a number she recognized. Victor Kane, CEO of Mid-States Distribution, one of Brightspan's largest partners. "Jovi," Victor said, his tone warm but direct. "We've been watching this whole mess. I'm done letting my company's supply chain depend on people who don't understand it. I want to move our entire freight contract under Raines Infrastructure, directly." Jovi's fingers stilled on the keyboard. "That's a significant shift." "I'll put down a deposit today," Victor continued. "Enough to secure priority capacity for the next year. It should more than cover, well, anything you need to take care of personally." She thought of her brother's surgery, the rising costs, the urgent timeline. "Send the draft agreement," she said. "I'll review it tonight." When the call ended, she closed her laptop, the hum of the reactivated network still in her ears. The relief was real, but it carried a shadow. She'd won this round, but the game was still on, and she intended to keep playing until no one could take the board away from her again. 1 week later, the ripples of Jovi Raines' return had reshaped the industry. Martin Hale had vanished from the logistics world entirely. No resignation statement, no farewell post, just silence. Norva Freight's share price had dropped nearly 12% after losing multiple contracts. their once smug executives now dodging reporters in parking lots. Inside Brightspan, the board was locked in emergency restructuring talks, their power fractured and their reputation in shreds. Jovi, however, was moving forward. The air in her new downtown office felt different, lighter, sharper. Rain's Infrastructure LLC, no longer a quiet holding company, was now front and center. She had announced its evolution into a fully independent freight backbone for the Midwest, offering stability and efficiency to partners tired of corporate power plays. On the day of the announcement, cameras lined the room, reporters eager to cover her first official press conference. She stood at the podium, her posture steady, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had fought for her place and won. Rain's Infrastructure will provide what this region has been missing: reliability, she said. No political boardroom maneuvers, no gambles with people's livelihoods, just the uninterrupted movement of goods our communities depend on. Applause filled the space. But the real move came later that afternoon. In a private conference room, she signed a multi-year contract with Kane & Porter Industries, the same partner the Brightspan board had once tried to force her to hand over to Norva Freight. The ink was barely dry when she looked up at Victor Kane, a faint but deliberate smile on her lips. "There's something you might find interesting," she said. "Do you remember when Brightspan fought you on renewal terms last year?" Victor nodded. "They didn't know it then," Jovi continued, "but your company was quietly funding the shareholder lawsuit that's now dissolving their board." Victor's eyebrows lifted. Then he chuckled. Business has a way of balancing itself out. By the time evening fell, the news had broken. Kane & Porter's new deal with Rain's Infrastructure, combined with the legal pressure from the lawsuit, had effectively dismantled the old guard at Brightspan. Harlan's resignation was confirmed within hours. Standing at her office window, Jovi watched the city lights blink on one by one. The weight of the past weeks lifted from her shoulders. She was no longer fighting to reclaim something. She had built something new, on her own terms. The liberation was complete, and the affirmation was undeniable. She hadn't just survived the ambush, she'd rewritten the map, sometimes. The best revenge isn't taking back what they stole, it's building something they can never touch. If you found Jovi's journey as gripping as I did, drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if you enjoyed the twist. Share this with someone who loves a good corporate takedown. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story of turning betrayal into victory.